I would like to also ask you, building upon this question here is, we see sometimes Protestants who are heading towards the Catholic faith, or, St. Ambrose talks about one of his catechumens who was on his way to be baptized or in the process of becoming baptized and passed away before baptism. And then St. Ambrose says that he's confident that this individual is in heaven. I don't remember the guy's name at the moment, but we see this idea that these actual graces that God gives people, they ultimately kind of terminate in baptism, where you're just officially recognized as a member of the Catholic Church. But there's this thing that can happen where somebody without baptism in cooperation with actual grace can be saved, it seems, right? So I just I want to have you just, maybe there's not an exact answer, but at what point does somebody who's cooperating with the graces God gives them to the degree that they can, let's say they're Lutheran, and they're kind of working their way towards Catholicism. They're looking at Orthodoxy. They're looking at Catholicism. They're doing their homework. They're researching the papacy. They're doing everything that's reasonably within their power to discern the truth. And that person is suddenly in a car accident. They're just driving on the road, boom, end of life. So is that person, do you have a reasonable hope for their salvation because they were headed in the right direction? Or do you have to, at what point do those actual graces that God sends convert into sanctifying grace? Or do we not have access to that information?
Yeah, it's not really information that we have access to. I don't think that it would be proper to say that outside of the Catholic Church, outside of incorporation to the Catholic Church, that we have a reasonable hope for anybody's salvation. I think that would be a grave error, and I think that would practically lead to indifferentism. But what I can say on a sort of more theoretical level, when it comes to individuals, the big thing that we are talking about when it comes to invincible ignorance is the way in which somebody's conscience functions. Conscience, a lot of people, they have this sort of idea that conscience is like a feeling, or like maybe it's like a sort of bubbling up that comes in sort of inside like the flood of your heart. It's not really what conscience is. Conscience is said to be a judgment of the practical intellect. So conscience says we have these general moral principles. So let's say the principle is, I must obey God if he has spoken. So like for entering into the Catholic Church, it would say, if God has made a society that is necessary for my salvation, then I need to join that. That is a sort of general theoretical moral judgment that you make. But obviously, that general judgment is different than the particular judgment, which is, this society is necessary for my salvation, or that society is necessary for my salvation. So we have an obligation to seek out where God has spoken, where I ought to join, things like that. We have that obligation, and we ought to satisfy that obligation through research. When we realize this obligation, we have a point of what's called moral hesitation. So you're going along your day. Let's say you're a Lutheran. You feel perfectly secure in Lutheranism, and that's where your conscience has been bound. That's where you feel as if God is leading you. But then you have a point where you're making this judgment of your intellect. And you're like, I'm actually, for this or that reason, these are that motivations, I'm not sure that this is true. Okay. And there's one of two responses you can have. On the one hand, you could ignore it. You could say, I actually don't know about this. I'm not completely sure. It's just not a huge deal for me. I think I'm just going to continue on. I think I'm perfectly fine here. That would be an instance of willed ignorance. And willed ignorance is voluntary. So it's not invincible. It's vincible ignorance. Or you could do what you have to do, which is to seek out the truth. And seeking out the truth, you have to sort of make a proportional effort. You have to go in, maybe talk to a priest, maybe talk to Catholic friends, and make and strive for that.
Watch
effort.
Scholastic Answers on YouTube.
Yeah,
right?
watch Scholastic Answers on YouTube. Whatever the sort of path that God has put in your way, you have to actually go out and try to satisfy this obligation.